It's strange how often people tell me that they want to get rid of anxiety, even though anxiety is a valuable and healthy emotional response we're all meant to feel on a regular basis. And yet, when it comes to panic attacks, those things that make us feel like we're dying, people most commonly just want to be able to either manage them better or recover from them faster. Nobody ever really asked me to help them get rid of them, which normally provokes the question from me, wouldn't you rather just not have panic attacks? I'm Tim Box, mind coach, and this might well be the most important video you ever watch about panic attacks. I'm Tim Box, I'm a hypnotist, mind coach, and for more than a decade now, I've been working one-to-one with clients to help them overcome all sorts of anxiety-related issues. Now, I've never really worked out why panic is perceived as something we have to tolerate. Perhaps it's because we've been diagnosed with a panic disorder, and the perception is that it somehow makes it permanent. Or maybe it's because panic very much feels like something that happens to us rather than something we do, thus presenting as something that we have no control over. Or maybe it's just because we never actually want to have panic attacks, and yet we do, so therefore this must mean that any attempts to stop them are ultimately futile. Whatever the reason, if you've come here to learn how to manage your panic attacks, then I'm afraid this video is not for you. This video is going to tell you how to stop having them. If that's of interest to you, then please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos about managing your mental health. Okay, let's start at the beginning. What is a panic attack? A panic attack is a sudden period of intense fear that triggers a physical reaction in a situation where there isn't any real or apparent danger. In basic terms, it's your mind triggering an extreme fight or flight response when the circumstances really don't warrant it. Oh, and it feels a lot like you're going to die. Symptoms can include a painfully tight chest, an inability to breathe freely, and a pounding heart rate. This can also be accompanied by trembling, sweating, and a feeling of lightheadedness or dizziness. In fact, many people would end up in the emergency room as a result of their first panic attack, having confused it for a heart attack or some other life-threatening medical emergency. Panic attacks will often arrive without any obvious perceived cause, so it feels like something very severe is going wrong with our body. Part of the problem with panic attacks is the confusion about where the threat is coming from. But if there's no apparent cause, then why do they happen? And more importantly, how can we stop them? To understand what's going on in practical terms, we need to talk about how panic attacks start. Having worked with anxiety and panic disorders for the last decade, it's perhaps unsurprising that certain patterns emerge when people tell me what they've been going through. One very common pattern with panic attacks is how we experience our first one. Usually we've been through a period of either increased stress, high excitement, or maybe just had a recent event that's caused us to neglect our rest or our food and/or drink intake over the last 24 to 48 hours. In short, for some reason, our physical and emotional resources are drained and we are perhaps without even realizing it at a low ebb. At some point, we might start to experience a physical symptom as a result of our batteries being too low. It's usually something along the lines of heart palpitations, shortness of breath, dizziness, or any combination of those three things. This then causes alarm because after all, there's no immediate reason why we suddenly feel out of breath or dizzy. There must be something wrong. This then results in our body triggering the stress response, which happens to us all when we feel under threat. The stress response is that first stage of fight or flight, where our body kickstarts itself into activity in order to take immediate, perhaps life-saving action. In other words, our muscles tense up, our breathing becomes shallower and faster, and our body starts to fill with adrenaline. This is then often perceived by the person already feeling alarmed as a worsening of the confusing physical symptoms. And before you know it, we're now starting to become increasingly alarmed about the possibility that we're having some sort of medical emergency. This then triggers full-on panic, and the rest, as they say, is the story we tell our therapist. Some people will retrospectively manage to work out the basic things they did wrong to cause this to happen, and might in the future decide to make sure they get their rest, stay hydrated, and stop missing meals. However, this doesn't always stop the experience repeating, because subconsciously speaking, the damage is already done. Now, when I say the damage is done, I don't mean you've now in some way broken your fight or flight response and triggered a panic disorder. What I do mean though, is that in that extremely fearful moment, your mind learnt something. As I've already mentioned, and as you very probably already know, panic attacks feel like you're going to die. And in that moment, your subconscious very much perceived this to be a life-threatening situation. That's why the panic got worse before it got better. As a result, from that moment on, whenever you then feel any of those initial symptoms, such as a shortness of breath, a tight chest, or any sense of dizziness, then your mind hits the red alert button, because this might be the beginnings of another life-threatening situation. This is why it's worth pointing out that a panic attack is not a malfunction. It's the perfectly appropriate and functional response to how your mind perceives what's going on. It's that perception that's wrong, not the response. After all, what's the appropriate and healthy response to a life-threatening situation? That's right, panic. Our first panic attack only causes more in the future because now we're fearful of it happening again, and a part of our mind believes them to be potentially deadly. We've learned something in such a powerful way that our mind can't just ignore the possibility of it happening again. This is why we then become hypervigilant about what our body's doing in terms of heart rate and breathing. We become disproportionately alarmed by any lightheadedness or unexplained discomfort in the chest or stomach. If we perceive anything out of the ordinary about the way we feel, that becomes a problem. But here's the catch. Our body is constantly changing what it's doing. Our heart rate doesn't remain at a constant rate 24 hours a day. It speeds up and slows down, sometimes quite drastically. We've all had moments of lightheadedness as our blood flow regulates, and we've all had discomfort in our stomach or chest as our body goes about the business of digesting the food we eat. Most of the time, all this stuff happens from moment to moment without us even noticing, because our mind has no reason to draw our conscious attention to it. However, if we've experienced a panic attack in the past, we might now be marking these things as potential precursors of panic. So of course, now we notice them. But it's then our focus on these symptoms and the alarm we feel because of them that causes us to begin the process of panicking about them. And this is the important point here. The amplification of the ordinary, everyday body regulating process into a full-blown panic attack is based almost entirely on the idea in our subconscious that panic is life-threatening. However, the truth is, panic attacks are not deadly. They just feel like they are. I had a client once who came to see me for anxiety issues. During our sessions, he told me how he used to also suffer with panic attacks, but doesn't anymore. When I asked him what happened to stop him panicking, he told me the story of, in his words, his 565th panic attack. On that day, his panic response had kicked in so hard and he was in such obvious distress that the people he was with called an ambulance. The paramedic who arrived was very kind and patient and helped him calm down and breathe easily again. My client started to apologise for calling them out, but the paramedic told him, "That's okay, it's my job." And he told him how he'd been called out to literally thousands of panic attacks over the years. And he remarked how he'd never seen a fatal one. He observed how every single person he'd treated felt like they were going to die at that moment, but nobody ever had. Panic attacks are scary, he said, but they're not fatal. Something about my client's understanding shifted that night. Something in his mind stopped regarding panic as a life-threatening situation and just perceived it as unpleasant. And he said to me, "When you think about it, if the worst this can be is unpleasant, that's okay. I can handle unpleasant. I've handled lots of unpleasant stuff in the past. Unpleasant isn't going to kill me." From that moment, he stopped fearing panic attacks. And of course, once he stopped fearing them, he stopped panicking about them. If we can treat panic like the roller coaster we don't really want to be on, yes, it's going to be exciting and it might even scare the hell out of us, but in a few minutes it will stop and we'll get off and get on with our life. Then we can stop exacerbating and inducing that response. It was a few weeks after the discussion with that client that I saw another client who was seeing me to specifically help with panic attacks. She was having 2 or 3 every day. I relayed the story about the paramedic and we talked about how the experience won't kill you, and we did all the things we do in a therapeutic session. When she returned a couple of weeks later for a follow-up, she was over the moon because she hadn't had any panic attacks since the session. However, she mentioned that she'd had one occasion where she thought she was going to have one. She was driving on the motorway, going to the shops with her boyfriend, and felt, in her words, a bit weird. It was the feeling she would traditionally associate with the onset of a panic attack. She pulled over to the side of the road and her boyfriend asked if she wanted him to drive them home, which was pretty much how they would deal with this usually, to retreat to a safe environment. However, this time she said to him, "I think I'm going to have a panic attack, but that's okay. Once it's over, we'll carry on to the shops. The interesting thing here is that because she treated it like nothing more than an inconvenience that wasn't a threat to her safety and wouldn't drastically interrupt the day, she didn't actually have a panic attack. The feeling passed in a few moments and she drove on. I think this experience was more profound for her than the fact she'd gone 2 weeks without a trace of panic, because this was the point where she understood it wouldn't happen anymore. Her understanding of what it meant to have a panic attack had shifted, and as a result, they no longer scared her in the same way. If you're someone that suffers with panic attacks, then what I really hope you take away from this video is that the moment they stop is the moment we find a way to no longer fear them. And if you're sitting there watching this thinking, but Tim, I've been diagnosed with panic disorder, isn't that more serious? Then please check out my video about disorders, what your diagnosis actually means, and why that label doesn't have to restrict your recovery. Guys, I really hope you've enjoyed this video and that it in some way helps you get the other side of panic attacks. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and of course, why not subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one?